Welcome to all. So today is the fourth series of PG course webinar series. Today we have Dr. Bhavya Shivalangaya from Dayanand Sagar Institute of Medical Sciences at Ramanagara. So she is the in-charge HOD and Assistant Professor of Department of Respiratory Medicine. She will be sharing her uh, uh, thoughts on spirometry interpretation, how to make it more easier. We welcome you, Dr. Bhavya Shilangaya. The screen is all yours. Now we have about 30 minutes for your presentation. Please stick on to time. And if time permits, we will be taking a few question and answers. The question and answers will be in the Facebook chat box. Thank you. Over to you now.
Thank you, Puneet, for your warm gesture. Hello, all. My today's topic is spirometry interpretation, which has to be made easy. To say, actually, it was really difficult. First of all, to understand all the physiology and to make it easy so that you people can understand. I have tried my best, so let me see how it goes. So let me start with the case presentation which we saw in our OPD. He was a 55-year-old male who presented with breathlessness to the cardiac OPD and had diagnosed with severe aortic stenosis. So the cause for the breathlessness, according to them, was aortic stenosis. They came to our OPD for pre-operative evaluation. He was not a known case of diabetic or hypertensive. He didn't have any history of asthma or allergy. All that he had was history of smoking that he had quit 2 years back. So on examination, his vitals were normal except for this body mass index, which was more than 28 kg per meter square. So he was a bit obese. And general physical examination, chest was clear bilaterally and heart had this systolic murmur of aortic stenosis. And what we could establish, what we could appreciate was the loud P2 along with the systolic murmur. So now the question to me was, is this breathlessness is only because of aortic stenosis or there is any component, other component, respiratory component involved with this? Maybe he may have COPD because of his smoking and he may have some restrictive lung disease because his BMI is high. So I have to evaluate, I need an answer for my question. So the best mode of investigation at this point seemed to be lung function test or lung function test. Broadly, lung function test consists of n number of investigation. In that, my part is spirometry today. Even ABG is a lung function test, but today I'm going to discuss only about spirometry. So spirometry is most useful and commonly available test which helps us to diagnose and treat the general respiratory health. It is very accurate in establishing the pathophysiology of the disease, and it just measures the volume of the air which we exhale or inhale as a function of time. As simple as it is, the physiology, and it's very simple to perform. But no, it's not as simple as it is to interpret. To interpret this, we must have a wide knowledge of respiratory mechanics, its physiology, and the background of the flow limitation, pressure, force, effort, everything to interpret this simple test. So to begin with the physiology, we all know that our lungs are elastic in nature, that they have tendency to collapse. Against the chest wall, which is very rigid, which has a tendency to expand, that is the outward force. So chest wall is an outward force and lung, it collapses. So the pressure in between, which is the pleural pressure, is always negative. We also know that our airway is always compressible, that it is subjected to the dynamic resistance of it is subjected to the dynamic changes because of the resistance and also the force and effort offered by the respiratory system. So when we exhale, there is inward recoil of our lungs. So the pressure changes affect this airway. The air from the alveoli moves air from the alveoli moves from the alveoli to the surrounding because pressure in the alveoli is higher compared to the external pressure. So from the lung it moves outside. The pressure as it moves outside goes on gradually reducing. So inside the alveoli the pressure is highest. As it moves towards the surrounding it is the lowest. But at one point the pressure becomes equal to that of the external pressure, that is the surrounding pressure. That pressure, the critical pressure is called as equal pressure point, where airway starts narrowing. This happens because our airway is compressible, pliable, and they depend upon, they are subjected to the changes because of the force and the act of expiration. So whenever this airway starts compressing at the equal pressure point, the flow also start reducing to a point where this airway totally collapses and there is no more flow outside the lung. So when it totally closes, whatever the air left inside the lung is the residual volume. So as I already told you, this spirometry, it is the function of volume with the time. Volume with time, it can also be expressed as flow with the volume. We know that this spirometry is effort dependent. That is, the patient has to understand the need for the test and the effort he has to give and the force he has to apply, so that we'll get a proper graph here. So it has two modality. One is flow with the volume, another one is volume with the time. So initially, to begin with, there is a blast of the air which comes out in the first second. That is, we have to blow out as fast and as hard as possible. So after this first second, the airflow starts reducing. This is because of this dynamic airway compression, that is the equal pressure point. So as the compression begins, the flow here starts reducing and keep on reducing to a point where the airflow totally stops. At this point, we have to begin our inspiration. So this is how the normal PFT looks. No, I mean not normal, the PFT actually looks. So it will have some values and the graph. So it's always better to see the graph first to see whether it is done in a proper way, the effort is good, whether the patient has understood the thing, and based on that we can interpret this value on the other side. And these values are always based on the predicted value. Predicted value means, like if you have taken an individual of 55-year-old male, this is a predicted value of 55-year-old normal individual which has been compared with our patient. But this we cannot use always. It's always better to have a baseline of the patient himself. So the baseline acts as a predicted value, which with the help of which we have to calculate the final value. This is because, let's take an example of a patient whose baseline value of FEV1 was 110% of the predicted. Later, when he came to your OPD with the symptoms, it became 85% of the predicted. 110%, 80%, both are within the normal value. Doesn't mean that the patient is normal. It definitely signifies that there is critical deterioration in the patient that which needs further evaluation and the management. So it's always better to compare with the baseline rather than the predicted value. So spirometry includes the following tests, that is a flow volume curve and flow volume loops, which includes FEV1, that is force expiratory volume at 1 second, FEC and FEV1 by FEC ratio. Then it includes the lung volume, that is a vital capacity, residual volume and total lung capacity. It also includes the reversibility test, bronchoprovocation test and diffusion capacity of lung carbon monoxide. So when the patient comes to my OPD, I usually ask them to avoid alcohol for a day at least, but standard at least avoid alcohol for 4 hours. And we have to avoid eating a large meal for about 2 hours and any vigorous exercise for about 30 minutes, and at least ask him to quit smoking for at least 1 hour before this test. And we have to find out if he is on any medication, any short-acting or long-acting bronchodilators or anticholinergics. Accordingly, we have to ask them to stop those bronchodilators 6 hours prior to the test in the case of if the patient is on SABA. On LABA, we have to ask them to stop it for 24 hours. If they are on long-acting anticholinergic, it's always better to avoid for 48 hours. So in our OPD, we usually say to patients to stop all these inhalers 1 night prior to attending our OPDs. So here the technique involves, first of all, make the patient very comfortable, explain him the procedure. Because we have seen, like patient after 1 or second attempt, they'll give up saying that it is not possible with them. We have to explain the procedure, flaws associated with, number of attempts the patient can take, what's the value of it. If we explain them giving some time, so they'll understand and they'll try their best effort possible. So after explaining them, we have to place a nose clip and ask him to inhale and exhale through the mouthpiece as fast and as hard as possible, and he has to exhale for a minimum of 6 seconds, but it can go up to 8 seconds or 10 seconds, how much of expiration he can do, followed by deep inspiration. Usually deep inspiration will be around 1 or 2 seconds. So how many trials we can do? Not 10 or 20, maximum of 8 trials. Out of these 8 trials, we have to select 3 trials which are near the minimum standard. Minimum standard, out of these 3, we have to select 2 where the FEV1 and FEC should not vary more than 200 ml. Where FEV1 and FEC of two trials are very near, less than 200 ml, out of these two, we can select one and give our final report. So going for the individual component, which I have told you before, that is the forced vital capacity. See, when we inhale, when we inhale to our maximum capacity, when we do this, we have our lung filled with air. That is the total lung capacity. If the total lung capacity is exhaled as hard and fast as possible, then it gives forced vital capacity. So this forced vital capacity is little different from slow vital capacity or normal vital capacity. What happens here in forced vital capacity? We give maximum effort. So the airway tends to collapse. There will be a lot of residual volume, which is shown in this graph here. But in slow vital capacity or normal vital capacity, this airway collapse will not happen early because the pressure generated, that is the pleural pressure generated, is not that high. We are not giving more force here. So SVCs tend to be higher than FEC. So normally, normal individual takes 3 seconds to expire, to empty his lung, whereas it is prolonged more than 6 seconds in the case of obstructive lung disease. It is considered normal if it is between 80 and 120%. There's a mild reduction if it is between 70 and 79. Moderate reduction if it is between 50 and 69, and severe reduction if it is less than 50%. Next component is FEV1, that is forced expiratory volume in 1 second. So we know the FEC, our lung is filled with air now and we are blowing for more than 6 seconds. Whatever the volume of the air we blew in 1 second, first 1 second is the FEV1. Normally FEV1 must be always compared with that of FEC. If it is 75 to 80% of the FEC in first second, that is normal. Usually it decreases in obstructive airway disease because the lung, when we give more more effort, the airway collapses. So the first second, the air coming out in the first second reduces, so FEV1 reduces. It definitely reflects the severity of the disease. So when FEV1 by FEC ratio, if it is less than 0.7, then only this mild, moderate, severe or very severe classification come into picture. If the ratio is less than 0.7, if FEV1 is more than 80%, then it is a mild obstructive airflow limitation. If it is between 50 and 79, it is moderate airflow limitation. 30 to 49 is severe airflow limitation, and less than 30 is very severe airflow limitation. So ratio, I have already told you, if it is ratio is more than 0.7, it is normal, and less than 0.7, it is obstructive flow limitation. More than 0.7 doesn't mean that it's only normal. It can be restrictive flow limitation also. This mechanism I'll explain you in another 5 to 10 minutes. So the new value which is making noise is FEV6. That is the forced expiratory volume in first 6 seconds. This is almost similar to that of the FEC if it is done at 6 seconds. People do say that FEV6 is easier compared to FEC. But it has also shown that it is sensitive but not that specific. Specificity is only 47 to 50% here. But advantage of this is it is small portable instrument which we carry in our pocket to the OPD and ask the patient to do it on the spot. Easier to do, but at the cost of less specificity. Next, the lowest considered thing is FEF 2575. That is the forced expiratory flow, which happens in the middle of the FEC. Initially, we got to know at first second of FEC, then 6th second of FEC. Now it is the middle of FEC, which is 25 and 75%. They say, it is said that it reflects the status of the small airway. So obstructive lung disease can be diagnosed early, but we cannot absolutely depend on it. We can just consider patient may have small airway disease, but it is not diagnostic or confirmative that the patient has small airway disease here, or it may be an early indicator of obstructive dysfunction. But here it is not dependent on patient effort. How much effort the patient gives, this gives a correct value. So again, the interpretation is here based on the percentage. If it is more than 60, it is normal. Between 40 and 60, mild obstruction. 20 to 40, moderate obstruction. If it is less than 10, it is severe airflow limitation. Again, after the forced expiration, we do the inspiration. Inspiration, again, there is no physiology here like dynamic airway compression here. Immediately after expiration, he can inspire for about 1 or 2 seconds. Again, it is effort dependent here. So coming to my patient who has presented with breathlessness, now my question is whether the breathlessness is because of the respiratory cause or cardiac cause. So my spirometry helps in this answer this question, that it characterizes the pathophysiology. It shows whether it is a respiratory cause or not. If it is a respiratory cause, whether it is an obstructive cause or restrictive cause. He is a smoker, he was a smoker, so it may be COPD, or he is obese, so it may be a restrictive lung disorder also. It also gives an idea about vascular disorders, not the spirometry, but the pulmonary function test. Because he has a loud P2, he may have pulmonary hypertension or any other vascular disorder. So pulmonary hypertension is with catheterization and all, we can know the pulmonary hypertension, but spirometry as such does not give you any idea about vascular disorders. So it helps us to assess the disability, morbidity, mortality involved in the surgery. It helps us in the evaluation of the risk factor involved in the surgery, post-operative outcome, and how much his breathlessness is going to improve after the surgery. We'll get to know by doing this simple bedside spirometer. So to interpret the spirometer result, it's always better to assess the quality of the test. Whether the patient has understood the test, whether the effort given is adequate or not, we have to check. That checking is done by seeing the graph. We have to observe the graph carefully. If the graph is wrong, the whatever the value we have got is also wrong. Even the value or at the normal range or low or high, if the graph is wrong, the values are totally wrong. So first examine the graph. If it is normal, then see the value, and we have to see whether it meets the acceptability or reproducibility standards. That is, out of 8 trials, 3 best out of 3, 2 where the difference in FEV1 by FVC volume is less than 200 ml. And always to categorize whether the patient has mild, moderate, or severe obstruction, we have to consider the post bronchodilator test, not the pre bronchodilator testing value. So these are some like artifacts which we commonly note. It has to begin properly at the 0 second and it has to continue for 6 seconds. We can note that here it has stopped at almost 3/4 of the second, almost 2 seconds here. That means the patient may have a restricted lung disease, or he has not done it properly. He has stopped at a second only. And here we can also observe that the flow, there is no blast here. Here the patient is smart that he is trying to conserve his air in the lung for next half of the spirometer. So what they do is, initially they have to conserve. They won't give the first blast of the air in first second. They'll conserve some so that they can blow out remaining 2 to 5 seconds. That must not happen. Patient must understand that first second has to be in a high flow and there has to be a blast of air outside. And we can also notice that there is a cuff here. Even though value comes normal, we shouldn't see the value because the patient has cuff and the spirometer is long. And here the patient effort, the last diagram, patient effort is poor here. Again, we cannot consider it has to be a normal spirometric test. So before seeing the value, we can have an idea looking at the graph whether the patient has obstructive or restrictive lung disorders. So that approach is called a Gestalt approach. So here we can see the normal flow volume loop and one abnormal flow volume loop here. There's a scooped out, there is a scooping layer here. Usually this scoop or rat tail appearance or commod sign suggests of obstructive lung disease. And here there is one more spirometer which looks normal but smaller than the normal graph. So the volume is reduced here, means that, this patient may have restrictive flow limitation. But there are few patients who will have combination of this obstructive and restrictive flow picture. So they have mixed obstruction here. After seeing the graph, then we have to go for the spirometric value. Normal value I have already discussed. If FEV1 is reduced in both obstructive and restrictive pattern. In restrictive pattern, lung volume as such is reduced, so FEV1 is reduced. In obstructive pattern, there is collapse in the airway, so FEV1 is reduced. FEC in obstructive pattern is prolonged because because they can blow it for a longer duration. So the ratio for FEV1 by FEC is decreased. Correct? Yeah, it's decreased. Whereas in the restrictive pattern, FEV1 and FEC both are decreased. That means the ratio can be normal or even increased. So if you see FEV1 by FEC in the normal range, then we have to see FEV1 by FEC. If both are decreased, then it is a restrictive pattern. Then we can have a look at 25 and 75 of FEC, which is decreased both in obstructive and restrictive pattern. And when we see the graph, it is scooped out lesion in obstructive pattern and gives a witch hat, this kind of hat lesion in restrictive pattern. So as we know, the restrictive pattern is commonly seen in kyphoscoliosis or interstitial lung disorders or neuromuscular disorder or in our case the obesity. But the obstructive pattern is seen in chronic bronchitis, emphysema and bronchial asthma. We have to differentiate this COPD from the bronchial asthma because there is a fine line in the treatment modality between COPD and bronchial asthma. Only if we diagnose bronchial asthma, we can treat it accurately. So we need some more tests to differentiate this obstructive pattern where the reversibility test comes. First, do the spirometry. After doing the spirometry, we'll get to know that it has an patient has an obstructive pattern. After that, we have to give them short-acting bronchodilators, either salbutamol or ipratropium bromide. Salbutamol of 400 microgram via spacer, and we have to ask them to wait for 15 minutes. Ipratropium bromide 160 microgram, and ask them to wait for 30 minutes, and repeat that test in the similar way. And see for the change in the FEV1 or FEC. If there is increase in the volume of more than 200 ml or the percentage of more than 12%, means 200 ml and 12%, then we say that reversibility testing is positive. Doesn't mean that if it is negative, doesn't mean like we shouldn't give them any bronchodilators or steroid. Even though negative, we have to continue with bronchodilators and steroids, wait for 6 to 8 weeks and repeat the test after 6 to 8 weeks to get to know the baseline. So one more test. And this I have one clinical case. Here we can see the FEC pre and post, where the improvement is 14% and FEV1 is 8%. So according to our criteria, if it is more than 12%, then there will be a reversibility either in FEV1 or FEC. So considering here there is 14%, it has to be reversible, but the other criteria is 200 ml. 200 ml criteria is not met between pre and post. It's almost 170 ml, and here it's almost 110 ml. The criteria is not met, means the reversibility test is not positive. Even the impression like FEC changes more than 14%. Some patients do present with chronic cough or shortness of breath, and the spirometry, if it is done, it will be normal. As I told you before, baseline may be 110. When I do it, it may be 85. 85 is normal. Doesn't mean that 85 is normal value. Doesn't mean that the patient is normal. He has cough. He has difficulty in breathing. So we have to evaluate him further. To evaluate this, what we do is a bronchoprovocative test, where we give some agent which increases the reactivity of the airway, which causes bronchoconstriction, especially the methacholine, most commonly used, but not sure in India. Long back I had heard it was done in Kolkata, but I'm not sure. Histamine can be used. Mannitol, the sensitivity is less here. So what we do baseline spirometry. Once we get the baseline spirometry, we'll give nebulization with methacholine. 1 ml consists of 25 mg, 2 to 3 ml, only for one breath. Take a single breath, hold it for 10 seconds. Immediately within 1 minute, you have to do the FEV1 and see any change. If there is a drop of more than 20% in the baseline FEV1, from the baseline FEV1, then methacholine challenge test is positive and the patient has a hyperreactive airway. That concentration where the fall in FEV1 is 20%, that is called as provocative concentration. If the fall in FEV1, if not 20%, if it is between 15 and 19%, then we can give 2 more breath of methacholine. If it is less than 15%, give 4 more breath of methacholine. But one thing we have to be careful while doing methacholine challenge test is we have to be sure that FEV1 is more than 70% of the patient normal, because this increases the reactivity of the airway. Patient may undergo bronchospasm and end up in ICU. So we have to be little careful before performing this test. So now coming to our other group of disorder. Now all these are dynamic obstruction. Now is a fixed obstruction. Fixed obstruction may be fixed intrathoracically or extrathoracically. This obstruction may be Bennett's stricture or goiters or neoplasm, bronchial stenosis, anything. So what happens? They are fixed. So this is one intrathoracic fixed lesion. They are fixed. The flow is limited. But this flow is limited. It will not change the flow during the inspiration or expiration because this is a fixed structure. It is not floppy. This is not moving. This is very rigid and does not bend to positive or negative airway changes which is happening in the lung. So the spirometry, what we get will be flattening of the expiratory curve also, inspiratory curve also, which looks like this. But when we come to Variable lesion may be tracheomalacia, which are the floppy segments, or it may be mobile tracheal tumors or bronchial tumor. They move with the respiration. So in a variable intrathoracic intrathoracic obstruction, think that there is an obstruction intrathoracically. When the patient exhale, there's a positive pressure in pleura. We know that. So the positive pressure in the pleura. The positive pressure, since the segment is very floppy, the floppy segment constricts. Constrict means flow limitation happens. This is during exhalation, that is the expiration. So the curve will be flattened during the expiration in the intrathoracic obstruction. Whereas during the inspiration, the pleural pressure is negative. Negative means it is pulling outside. The floppy segment comes out. So inspiration will be normal. So expiration is flattened and inspiration will be normal in the variable intrathoracic lesion. By looking at the graph only, we can say the patient has a variable obstruction here. So one more component what we have to give importance here is mid expiratory flow limitation. So this is this is the FEC. The midpoint of FEC, it gives rise to MIF 50% in the expiration. MEF 50% during the expiration, and midpoint during the inspiration is MIF 50%. We can note in this graph, MIF is greater than MEF. So the ratio of MEF divided by MIF at the 50% is always lesser than 1. But here, what happens in our intrathoracic lesion, our EF is reduced. First of all, normally it is reduced. Here it is drastically reduced. So the ratio of E by I is less than 1. But here it is diminished to 0.2, which is far from the normal value of near 1 to near less than 0.2. So by calculating this MEF and MIF ratio, we can know whether the patient has intrathoracic or extrathoracic obstruction. Coming to the extrathoracic obstruction, here the patient has some obstruction above the level of the trachea, like vocal cord palsies or obstruction, maybe neuromuscular disorders, burn, there may be airway injury here, or obstructive sleep apnea. So here, this obstruction was subjected to the transmural pressure changes, wherein intrathoracic they are pleural pressure changes. Here they are subjected to the transmural pressure changes. So during the inspiration, there is negative pressure happening, so there will be collapse. So inspiratory limb will be smaller, that is flattened. Whereas during the expiration, there is positive pressure here, so they're wide open. So the expiration loop will be normal here. Again, when we consider the ratio of MEF to MIF, it is more than 1. Till now, we discussed about dynamic lung volume, that is the change in the lung volume with the time. Now it is about static lung volume. We have like 7 to 8 static lung volume, but important to us are 3. One is functional residual capacity, residual volume, and total lung capacity, because these are the one which helps us to diagnose our emphysema or chronic bronchitis. So during the physiology, I told you expiration, which causes dynamic airway compression and the airflow limitation. At some point, this equal pressure point closes, shuts off. So some amount of air remain within the lung. This is called as residual volume. We all know that. But simple spirometry will not measure this residual volume. We need another set of instrument to measure this residual volume. Before we used to use nitrogen washout technique and helium dilution technique, but by now it is replaced by body plethysmography. So these are the lung capacity. We know when we inhale, our lung will be filled with air. That is our total lung capacity. Total lung capacity has been furtherly there are smaller component of it, like vital capacity, reserve volumes, expiratory reserve volumes, residual volume, and all. So total lung capacity usually increases in obstructive lung disease and decreases in restrictive lung disease, especially because of the residual volume. In the obstructive lung disease, the airway resistance is high. There is a early closure of the airway, so a lot of air left behind, so a lot of residual volume. So a lot of residual volume means a lot of total lung capacity. But with our spirometry, we can measure all this value, but not the residual volume, where we are going to take help of body plethysmography. So it is based on the principle of Boyle's law, which says change in pressure correlates with the change in the volume, and change in pressure and the volume is always a constant. The advantage of this body plethysmography over the nitrogen washout technique, or helium dilution technique, or nitrogen washout technique is, here we are not using any gas. There we used to measure exhaled volume of the single gas, but here there is no gas at all. And there, if you want to repeat the test, we have to wait till all inhaled gas comes out, so that he'll come back to normal and again inhale the same gas. But here, since there is no gas, we can repeat how much ever time we want, how quickly ever we want, along with giving a total along with total lung capacity and residual volume. This also gives an idea about airway resistance and compliance. Just a second, please. So this is body plethysmography. This is how it is done. The patient is made to sit in a box called as body box, and he is connected to a mouthpiece which is closed. So at the end of the expiration, he has to pant against this closed circuit. So some pressure is generated at the mouth, which gives us the mouth pressure, which correlates with that of the alveolar pressure. So when he pants against this closed circuit, there is change of volume which happens within the box. That change of volume gives the change of volume in the lungs. So we have change of pressure at the mouth and change of volume in the lung. By using this Boyle's equation, change of pressure and the volume, we can derive the volume of the lung, that is the functional residual capacity we can derive here. These are all like complex physics involved. We are not calculating all these things. The instrument gives us the value. So with body plethysmography, we get expected residual volume plus residual volume, which is functional residual capacity. So with the spirometry, we can definitely calculate the ERV. FRC minus ERV gives rise to residual volume. With the residual volume, we can calculate our total lung capacity. So understanding this complex physics, physiology, and determining this total lung capacity, like it must have some clinical implication, at least some minimal clinical implication. That is, here we already know how to differentiate obstructive lung residual lung defect, but this residual volume also gives us an idea to differentiate between these two pattern. In restrictive lung disease, this residual volume or residual capacity or total lung capacity remains, it decreases, whereas in obstructive lung disease, it increases because residual volume increases here. So next, going for diffusing capacity of lungs for carbon monoxide. Here it measures the lung, ability of the lung to transport inhaled gas, that is the carbon monoxide here, from the alveoli to that of the pulmonary capillaries. Normally it is 20 to 30 ml per milliliter per millimeter of the mercury. So it depends upon the three factors. One, this alveolar capillary membrane. Second is the thickness of the membrane. The third is the driving pressure, that is the alveolar and the arterial pressure difference. So it is directly proportional to the area of the alveolar capillary membrane with that of the driving pressure, and inversely proportional to the thickness of membrane. So the procedure is also very simple than spirometry here. Patient will have a normal tidal volume, tidal ventilation, where one blast of 0.3% of carbon monoxide along with the helium is given. He'll inhale that concentration and hold it for 10 seconds. After holding it for 10 seconds, he'll exhale. So the trace gas, that is the helium, which will come out. This helium gives the functional residual capacity or the residual volume, whereas the carbon monoxide gives us an idea of diffusion capacity of lung for carbon monoxide. So based on this equation, we have to see that diffusing capacity is directly proportional to the alveolar capillary membrane. So in the case of pneumonectomy or lobectomy, we see some part of lung is taken off. Means the alveolar capillary membrane is gone. That means DLCO has to reduce. But in fact, this doesn't happen. It remains normal. That is because whatever the loss of the lung volume is loss of the lung volume is overcome by the increase in the blood supply to the other part of the lung. So blood supply remains normal, so DLCO remains normal. So overcome this disadvantage, what they introduced was Croc's constant. That is DLCO divided by the alveolar volume. It's very easy to get alveolar volume, that is tidal volume minus dead space into the respiratory rate gives rise the alveolar volume. With this DLCO with this alveolar volume is standardized measure, which is absolute DLCO or KCO, and overcome this I mean, what to say, overcome this overcome this disadvantage of not having a part of the lung, even though DLCO comes normal here. So again, the spirometric value here, it also helps us to differentiate obstructive and restrictive pattern here. But the most important differentiation which helps us is to differentiate chronic bronchitis and emphysema. Again, here there are a lot of new techniques which has come out in the treatment of this COPD, that is a chronic bronchitis and emphysema. Emphysema has a lot of surgical modality of the treatment now. Only if we differentiate between these two, then we can pose this patient for the necessary surgery. So with the DLCO, we can definitely differentiate chronic bronchitis and emphysema. Chronic bronchitis, DLCO will be usually normal. In emphysema, this alveolar capillary membranes will be severely destroyed. So DLCO will be reduced. So there are some conditions where the DLCO is reduced, which I've already discussed: obstructive lung disease and parenchymal disease, pulmonary vascular disease, because there will be constriction and anemia. Sometimes asthma also cause increase in the DLCO. That is because there are theories, because it's not theory, it's also proven that extravasation of the red blood cells happens into the alveoli, or there is increased pulmonary vasculature in the asthmatic lung, and it is also increased in pulmonary hemorrhage, polycythemia, and congestive cardiac failure. So now my patient is still waiting in the OPD for me to give clearance for the surgery, but still I'm thinking whether his breathlessness is because of his respiratory cause or cardiac cause. And now this restrictive defect is also there. I have to think whether it's obesity or not. So he is posted for surgery now. Now I have to find out whether his breathlessness is because of the respiratory cause, where our spirometry will give an idea. So if it is not the respiratory cause, then I have to find out whether the cardiac surgery will improve his condition. Second thing. Third thing, for the example, the patient who have posted for pneumonectomy or lobectomy in the case of lung carcinoma, we must also find the remaining lung is healthy or not. Usually lung carcinoma commonly seen in smokers. So the remaining lung may have COPD features. So after pneumonectomy also, patient may have breathlessness or some mortality or morbidity. So I must know what will be his lung function after the operation. I have to estimate the morbidity, disability, and mortality. And this preoperative testing is also needed if the patient is undergoing any abdominal or cardiac surgery. If any surgery more than 3 hours, there is definite risk involved intraoperatively, postoperatively also. And in my patient, there is obesity involved. There may be difficulty in intubation because he'll have small airway. All this assessment I have to do. So even though I give clearance, I have to assess and explain the patient the need for the surgery and the disadvantage involved, and the number of days he may stay in ICU, or he may need ventilator support. Everything we have to explain them. All this idea will be given by our spirometric test. So here what we calculate is a prohibitive risk, that is a post-operative FEV1, by knowing the pre-operative FEV1. For example, if the patient is posted for lobectomy or pneumonectomy, so we know the pre-operative FEV1, and by surgeons we will be knowing how many segments they are going to remove. So if they are removing some segment, the number of segments which are remaining divided by the 18 gives some value. If it is less than 0.8, definitely the patient is under very high risk for the proposed surgery. But there are certain guidelines for thoracotomy patient, for pneumonectomy, lobectomy patient, which I am going to tell you now. So for thoracotomy patient, we have to do the predicted FEV1 using the pre-op FEV1. If it is more than 40, then low complication will be anticipated. If it is less than 40, patient may need post-operative ventilation support, ICU stay, and the surgery may be associated with some morbidity and also mortality. If it is less than 30% of FEV1, then definitely non-surgical management has to be planned. Again, the same thing with the DLCO also, but DLCO has to be interpreted with FEV1. If DLCO is more than 40 and FEV1 is more than 40, again the risk is low or intermediate with a saturation which is normal, more than 90%. If DLCO is less than 40 and FEV1 is more than 40, DLCO less than 40, FEV1 more than 40, there is some increased risk of cardiac and respiratory morbidity associated, which the patient has to be informed beforehand. If DLCO is less than 40 and FEV1 is less than 40, then again it is a high risk. Better to defer the surgery or explain the on-table death complication to the patient. And again, BTS also have the guidelines for pneumonectomy. If the patient FEV1 is more than 2 liter, then we have to post them for pneumonectomy, and lobectomy of more than, if the FEV1 of more than 1.5 liter. This criteria or this criteria have to be followed only if the underlying lung is normal in the absence of any other interstitial lung disease or irreversible lung disorders. And this spirometry also helps us to assess the patient who need a lung transplantation. For example, if FEV1 and FEC, if it is less than 30%, definitely he is a good candidate for to undergo lung transplantation when other criteria are met for the lung transplantation. So there are definitely some contraindication for our spirometry, especially the recent abdominal, thoracic or eye surgery. It increases the pressure or the tension. So it has to be avoided. Hemodynamic instability or any acute illness like chest pain, fever, shortness of breath, nausea, anything, this has to be avoided. And have to be avoided in the current hemoptysis or pneumothorax. Patient having myocardial infarction or within last month, this test has to be avoided. In the unstable angina, again, this test has to be avoided as it precipitates angina. And yes, spirometry is really wonderful. Probably it's simple, but it will not act alone. It is always a combination of clinical history, physical examination, laboratory data, and imaging, which comes together along with our spirometry, which helps for the in the management plan of our patient presenting with breathlessness, cough, or any other chest disorder. They act to support or exclude the diagnosis. These are my references. I have not included, yeah, it is there, BTS reference also. And thank you.